That's,
So I'm gonna call the
halfway.
meeting to order, and there is a anticipated executive session at first on our agenda and a proposed motion.
I'll move to find that premature public knowledge regarding a labor relations agreement with employees would clearly place the town at a substantial disadvantage. And further move that we enter executive session to discuss a labor relations agreement with employees under Title I, Sections 313A1B of the Vermont statutes, and invite Police Chief Patrick Foley, Police Lieutenant Eric Shepard, Finance Director Shirley Goodell-Lackey, and Town Manager Eric Wells to join.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion on the motion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
There are no nays. We are in executive session. Of executive session and back on the regular agenda, which would bring us to the minutes from January 14 and January 21, 2025. Is there a motion?
I move to approve the minutes of January 14th, 2025, with any necessary correction.
Second? Is there a second?
Second.
Page 1. Page 2. Hearing no changes, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
The ayes have it. Next, is there a motion for January 21?
I'd also move the approval of the minutes of January 21, 2025, with any necessary modifications.
Is there a second?
Second.
Page 1. Page 2.
Down in number 8,
I saw that too.
well, first of all, on the second line, it's just a typo, changes in wages in benefits. It should be wages and benefits. But then the 4.8% was not the bottom line increase. It was sort of our baseline, and then we added the other positions. So it should probably be corrected to 5
Been
point,
baseline is what you're.
or change it to the right number.
Okay.
Is that what you caught too, Terry, or
I
something else?
also had one more in the fourth line from the bottom on that. It talks about a part-time social worker. I think that we're not really
Full-time.
talking about a part-time, we're talking about a part year.
That's true, yep.
Good
Full
point.
year part-time.
Yeah.
Okay. Page 3. Page 4. Okay. Subject to those modifications, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
There are no nays, the ayes have it. Okay. Next, public comment. This is a moment for people in the audience or participating online to make a comment about pretty much anything. It can be something on the agenda, or you can wait, which might be the smarter thing, but it's up to you. But it can be anything at all. Are there any public comments tonight? Okay.
Good evening. My name is Danielle Doucette. I am the representative from the Parks and Rec Committee on the Catamount Community Forest Management Committee here in town, where I got to attend the Williston Selectboard breakfast yesterday. Thank you, it was delicious and gourmet, Ted. Woohoo! I forgot to bring home the croissants, but oh well. I want to let you know that I had a conversation with Reed Parker, who's the chair of the Energy Committee, and Senator Ginny Lyons. She was asking us about like energy things in town, and then she was telling us about the solar panels that were built in the meadow here behind the town hall in 2006. And I was just like amazed. She was on the select board then, and it happened in 2006. I couldn't believe it. She was very proud. And I just couldn't believe it was done almost 20 years ago. And I just wanted to, when you're thinking about the clean heat proposal coming up, asking you to keep in mind the Williston residents 20 years from now, how proud they could be for what you do to benefit the residents who move here, and they will benefit from moving into homes that are already equipped with clean heat. You know, I think you have a great opportunity. So, thank you.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Dan.
Danielle.
Is there any other public comment for him? Eric, is there anybody online?
No one online.
Okay. Next, Williston Clean Heat Standards Update.
I can
Yeah,
kick
go ahead.
things off. So this is going to be an update for the select board after a discussion last summer. The board received a request to consider a clean heat standard ordinance locally and tasked staff with working with our committees to discuss it further. And Senior Planner Melinda Scott staffed the Energy and Housing Committee. They've had a series of really good discussions, and she's worked and discussed with other stakeholders out as well. So Melinda's prepared a comprehensive memo that she'll walk through this evening for the board. Staff's not looking for any final direction on this evening. It's a check-in discussion, kind of where we've been with this since the last meeting. Melinda will go through some different things to think about in the ordinance structure itself. If the board wants to move forward with it, we're looking for your feedback at this point as a check-in here, and what additional information you may want before making a direction to staff if you want to proceed with drafting an ordinance or not. So it's a lot of information to go through with this as well.
Sure.
So probably one of many conversations.
Thanks. So just to briefly go over the public input that the Energy Committee has been doing regarding the clean heat standard. A survey was distributed to 36 developers, architects, engineers who have worked in Williston and/or surrounding areas. I've provided the survey results to you. We received 5 responses from developers, and then later on a response in person. There were some concerns raised about this adding costs to building new homes, and some feasibility challenges with heat pumps and heat pump water heaters in multi-unit buildings. Champlain Housing Trust, I should note, is installing heat pumps in their multi-story, multi-unit apartment buildings, primarily because heat pumps are the best way to provide air conditioning in those apartments. We've also been talking to representatives from VGS, formerly Vermont Gas, and received some feedback from them, which I've also provided you. They're mainly concerned that as individual towns move forward to adopt clean heat standards, that they may, kind of want to do their own thing, and so their concern is that there be some flexibility in any ordinance, and that the town try to be consistent with towns that have already done this, namely Burlington, South Burlington. The Williston Energy Committee discussed this at several meetings, and about 10 members of the public attended one or more of these meetings. And the Energy Committee also wrote and submitted articles to the Williston Observer, a couple of different articles, and received some feedback from those articles. So the Energy Committee submits the following recommendations for your consideration. They would like a clean heat ordinance to be adopted. The ordinance should require the primary heating source be non-fossil fuel, and primary is defined as a heating system designed to provide at least 85% of a home's heating load. The ordinance should apply to both heating and domestic hot water. The ordinance should apply to all new construction, both residential and non-residential. The ordinance should apply only to new construction, not existing buildings. The ordinance should include a waiver provision that applies if a developer can show that a non-fossil fuel heating system is more expensive over a 25-year lifespan than a traditional fossil fuel system, and incorporating the cost of carbon emissions in those calculations at $100 a ton. And small-scale projects such as ADUs and conversion of single-family homes to duplexes could also have a similar waiver provision that is somewhat simplified the town could provide a template spreadsheet to them to fill out to do a calculation. And then the Energy Committee also recommends that in conjunction with adopting this ordinance, the town amend its bylaw to incorporate the state residential building energy standards stretch code. And the majority of residential development, the majority of development in Williston is already subject to stretch code under Act 250. And when buildings are constructed to high energy efficiency standards, it'll reduce the heating load and subsequent costs to run heat pumps. The Energy Committee also recommended that enforcement of the ordinance not rely on self-certification, but rely on either an inspector appointed by the town or third-party inspection. The Williston Housing Committee also discussed the clean heat ordinance at a number of meetings, and 4 members of the public attended one or more of these meetings. The Housing Committee recommended the following. The committee members feel strongly that housing should be prioritized in light of the current housing crisis. Concerns were raised about the additional costs of a clean heat ordinance and the potential impact it would have on housing construction. Concerns were raised about the higher operational costs of heat pumps as compared to natural gas heating systems. And concerns were raised about the complexity of the proposed waiver provision, the requirement to calculate and compare the expenses of a conventional system to a heat pump system over 25 years, and whether this would be overly burdensome to small-scale infill projects. And one committee member does support the proposed ordinance without a waiver provision. The other committee members support it as long as there's a waiver for affordable housing. So if the town were to adopt a clean heat ordinance, it would be really doing something fundamentally different from how it regulates today. The town currently doesn't have a building code. It does not have a building code enforcement regime. So some things to think about. We are in a climate crisis. Vermont is falling short of its climate action goals, and including how many installing heat pumps in homes. Adopting a clean heat ordinance would result in more heat pump installations than are occurring today in newly constructed homes, and that would reduce carbon emissions. It would also eliminate the need for future retrofits to electrify heating systems in those homes. We're also in a housing crisis, and we're falling short of our housing goals. Imposing this requirement on new developments would increase the cost of building new homes. Imposing this requirement would incur additional costs for the town for inspection services. There are some significant feasibility challenges with installing heat pumps and heat pump water heaters in multi-unit, multi-story buildings. There are some examples of successful installations, but there's a shortage of contractors with the expertise needed for such installations. And Efficiency Vermont they can help out with these projects, but their capacity is limited as well. So in summary, adopting a clean heat ordinance would allow the town to make progress on its goals for energy and climate, but it might slow down progress on building more homes, especially affordable homes. So I've listed out sort of a menu of options that you can consider from...
I have some questions. Can I ask those
sure,
before we
yeah.
go to next steps? Because it might influence my
Yeah.
listening to your next steps. Sorry, I have a few.
Oh, no.
Do we have any numbers? We keep saying it's more expensive. Is it 1% more expensive, or is it 15% more expensive to put clean heat into a building?
I've done some research, and I haven't gotten any consistent and clear answers about the difference in cost. My estimate is you know, it depends on what kind of heat pump system you're putting in, but between, I don't know, $5,000 and $10,000, an incremental cost difference.
That's for like a 3-bedroom home or something like that?
Something like that.
Yeah, yeah. Has this slowed down development in South Burlington?
I don't know. I don't think so. I do know that, like, for example, the O'Brien development, which is completely all electric, I don't believe there's any affordable homes in that development.
I have more, but you're dying to ask a question.
No, I just think to calculate the additional costs, we have to calculate, you know, the town hiring more employees to monitor this, you know, the carbon cost, who's gonna calculate, you know, the cost of the extra carbon if we have a less than 85% of the electrical heating. There's also, you know, the third-party inspection. You know, I've talked to builders, and they say they don't care. As long as it's a level playing field and all builders go by the same standard, they're good with it. They just know they're gonna be putting the cost on the consumer. And I think by doing something like this, it's gonna make Williston more inclusive to who can afford to live here,
Exclusive. Fewer people could choose to be here.
or be more inclusive. You know, maybe I got the wrong word. But it's gonna force.
Yes, it would make houses more expensive, and
Make
therefore,
homes more expensive.
yeah. I did have a question on that. So I was just, this is just like for my information, I was surprised that we have no building codes, which I assume that means we don't, it's not that there are no codes, but that they're state level codes or something?
Yeah,
And so we have no
correct.
additional codes?
Right, and the state codes only apply to buildings, duplexes and other buildings considered public buildings, so any multi-unit homes, but they don't apply to single-family.
There must be some building codes for single-family homes.
There are, you look up Vermont Residential Building Energy Standards.
Right, there's
It
the,
affects all new homes, all additions, alterations, repairs, the residential buildings. The RBES is a minimum standard of energy efficiency that applies to virtually all new residential construction, renovations, alterations, and repairs in Vermont. These get into, you know, like the R values and everything.
Yeah, there had to be some, like, otherwise houses would fall down.
Well, it's a pretty extensive,
That's just, is that just energy, Mike?
it's under, you know, you look up Vermont Residential Building Energy Standards, RBES.
Oh, I saw that in here somewhere.
And it, you know, it requires a 200 minimum amp service panel in the house. It also requires, you know, I mean, I'd have to look at it here again, but it requires a parking space or one space with a level 2 electric charging station, a 40 amp branch circuit to be provided to the garage or exterior of the building to accommodate a level 2 charging station. I mean, they've got heat pumps, they've got electric vehicle charging stations. All of these are outlined as mandatory requirements for any new construction in Vermont.
Can you, I don't understand the intersection between what he's explaining.
so, yeah, so the residential building energy standards are state code that apply to energy standards strictly. But as far as a general building code, the Williston does not administer a building code or any does no building code enforcement. And that's true for a lot of towns in Vermont, except for the pretty large towns like Burlington, South Burlington, and a few others.
Thinking about like the addition of personnel, you know, we did have, you know, these ordinances, we did require, you know, would a third-party service doing the inspections, would that be enough? Or would we need to hire one additional staff member theoretically, or, you know, or do we have the capacity within, you know, planning and zoning to, you know, assign a staff member as a building code inspector? Like, you know, what?
I would say Currently not. But, you know, so, for example, South Burlington has assigned this responsibility to, I believe, to the fire chief or the deputy fire chief. So, you know, it will require more time, and it will require somebody with expertise in this type of thing.
Well, I think we just have to be careful we don't conflate the things. If we're talking about hiring a third party to go in and say, yep, that's a heat pump.
Right.
Once, and for the life of the building,
Exactly.
that's a little different than having somebody go in and do a full building inspection code for everything we build. So I would think that while it would be a cost, it's also a cost you would pass on. I would kind of lump this in with the cost of requiring a more expensive heating system, right?
Some time ago, I think South Burlington was either online or here talking about the standards that they have applied in their city. And my recollection is that they said it would not cost anything more to do the clean heating standard for them.
Yeah, they did say that. Like I said, I've done some research and I've gotten conflicting answers, and I have not, you know, there are no like consistent and clear answers as to the costs that I can find, so.
Well, I guess I'd put that on my list of follow-up questions. That's pretty key to me. And just, I have another question unless somebody else wants to jump in. This whole waiver thing, I'm just baffled by why, it's so pejorative. I don't understand the waiver clause in here, because why would, or maybe you can explain to me why it would be, why the answer to that question would be different from one project to another.
Yeah, that's a good question.
I get them once in a while.
I mean, it could depend on the type of home that's being built. You know, a multi-unit apartment building would be, it would be a different process to put in heat pumps there and heat pump hot water heaters versus a single-family home. So, you know, the costs could vary depending on, you know, the type of building that.
I guess I could see the type of building, and I have to say I'm a little less I'm less sure on commercial buildings, and I'm interested in the problem of multi-unit, multi-story buildings. I do have some sympathy for a landlord trying to take care of 50 hot water heaters instead of one, right? I mean, so so setting those two things aside, I just think that having a developer who's got more resources, and I mean, we can't even figure out how much it's gonna cost to put one of these things in. We're gonna believe this guy's or gal's, you know, reason for why they can't do it because it's too expensive. I mean, I think it should be by building type and not have a waiver for economics. We can consider a waiver for other things, so I'm kind of on the fence about low-income housing, but we could have a waiver for other reasons, but for it's too expensive, I can't quite behind that.
My understanding, right, that South Burlington does not offer a waiver, but Burlington does, but that it has been only used or only granted like once or twice, like really limited amount in Burlington.
They both offer that, the waiver.
They do both offer that, okay, but it's been used very little or granted
Right.
very little. So
yeah.
the developers have found a way to make it work, or have proven that it is not, in fact, you know, more cost effective to have natural gas. So, you know, if it's not being utilized and they've not managed to prove it in other communities, I agree. I'm not sure that we would necessarily need to have a waiver. I think you know, the burden of making the technology cost effective for their design and for the, you know, will fall on developers, but, yeah, I mean, I see it as imperative. I mean, I agree, you know, housing is certainly one of the things that concerns me most, within our state right now, and I do, you know, we are in a housing crisis, and we are, you know, we need to add more units of all affordability levels. But I don't think that that can be to the exclusion of advancing our environmental and our energy standards. And so I think we need to figure out a way to marry the two. And because I really do think we are at a critical point for both of these things. So I'm willing to consider the potential for, an affordable housing, something, in that arena, but, yeah.
There's a lot of data that says that the people who need affordable housing are the ones who are most hurt by climate change,
Well,
so.
and, right, environmental justice would have us say that, yeah, exactly. We owe it to those in low-income and affordable housing to provide them with clean heat.
Right.
Kind of along the lines of what Greta said, if you have to have a waiver, then it's not a very good technology.
It have to be a really good reason for the waiver, and
Yeah.
and there might be one out there, there shouldn't be no waiver at all. I mean, because who knows, we can't think of every possible reason why something may or may not work, but you'd have to be pretty targeted.
No two people are gonna calculate the waiver the same.
Yeah, that's what I mean, it shouldn't be economic, it shouldn't be on those kind of numbers. I can't think of one off the top of my head that I would say, yeah, that's a really good reason to have a waiver, but there might be one out there. So you'd want to have some ability to appeal, but I can't think of, I can't think of a broad one that I can wrap my head around right now. I'd cut you off if you want to go on to next steps.
Are we allowed to adopt a clean heat regulation if we don't have building codes?
So we did get a legal opinion for this, and we do have the legal opinion advised that we did have the authority to adopt an ordinance, and that it should be done as an ordinance rather than through a zoning bylaw.
Yeah. Then, circling back to the enforceability of it and making sure that people are not self-reporting whether they did it or not, which I think, my experience being on this board is that the vast majority of the time, people actually do play by the rules, but then there are times when they don't, and people come to us 20 years later and say, hey, town, can you take over our road because it wasn't built right? And that's an awful situation. But just in terms of the cost of inspection and enforcement that way, I mean, you said that the fire chief or deputy chief is in charge of that in South Burlington?
I believe so, yeah.
Okay, I don't know, do they get paid more for doing that? Is there I mean, that's a significant area that I want to look into. And not so much as a deal breaker, but just as how's it gonna work if we do it? Because, again, we have, our budget went down last year. People are and this obviously we couldn't put it into this year's budget anyway, because we're way past the ability to do that in terms of the calendar, but it's a, the cost of it is a significant issue that I think we have to have the answer for before we make a decision.
South Burlington has a fire marshal position. I can check and see that could be a position that's tasked with this as part of that purview of that role in South Burlington. The other thing to explore for that here is what the frequency and volume would be to cost out. We had a kind of retainer contract with a third party that has expertise in this type of thing.
So I'm sorry, a warden, is that what you?
They have a fire marshal in
Fire
South
marshal.
Burlington in their fire department, and they have some of the inspection regime that the state had let the city take over years back for like condo inspection, things like that.
Okay.
It's a whole different realm of governance and code enforcement that they have.
Topic for another time, but I don't know how a fire marshal fits into a fire department. Is he a chief? Is he an assistant chief? Is he above that? Is he like a field marshal? Whatever.
Probably
Well, I mean,
in the command.
I've heard before that there's one or two other things that we would like to inspect for if we had a person to do it, but we don't. So if it's a bigger conversation, but, I mean, how many buildings do we bring online a year? 50? We don't, and it's a 1-hour inspection, that's not a full-time employee, so.
Right, no, I understand
yeah,
that.
so-
But if it's gonna be contracted out, I think that number should be something we know, at least
Right, but it
ballpark.
should probably be part of getting your COI.
I agree.
They can pay
Yeah,
for it,
yeah,
right?
I was thinking about that too.
Yep.
I think it's important we all look at the Vermont Residential Building Standards also, the code book. You know, it has all the building codes and.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking of, there has to be something out there.
There is, and it's amazingly tough, you know, like I said, it already takes into effect charging stations and everything in the homes.
Right,
It was just updated in 2024. Every couple of years, it's updated. Builders today are much better than they were just a few years ago.
So, Melinda, I think we interfered with your presentation.
Oh, no, these are great questions, and they really like point to the next steps. You know, so from what I'm hearing, you know, you can see having a waiver provision, but having it crafted so that it's not like based on somebody calculating, you know, the cost of a heating system over 25 years, but on other possible provisions. And we can think about that and, you know, come up with a few options there.
I mean, even if it's necessary, I mean, even if it's just something like at the discretion of the
Yeah.
recommendation of the select board, you can get away, I mean, it could be something, I mean, I know, and I like the either tab, but it's like, rather than spend hours and hours crafting something that I
Yeah.
can't even imagine right now, so.
Yeah, so as far as like other options, another discussion point would be whether to limit it to the heating system or to have the ordinance cover heating and hot water systems. And the recommendation of the Energy Committee was to have it cover both heating and hot water.
The Energy Committee think about splitting that at all between like single-family homes and these multifamily, multi-story things, like?
They discussed it, I believe, but I think the recommendation's still the same. And then another point was whether to allow renewable natural gas as a non-fossil fuel primary heat source. That would be Vermont Gas's preference. No surprises.
Naturally.
But, and in the end, the Energy Committee chose to kind of be silent on that recommendation.
So but the Energy Committee's recommendation is, and I want to clarify, is to be fossil fuel for the primary heating. I think that, you know, again, is an important point of clarification, so that there would be a secondary heating option, but that would, you know, account for less than 15% of, you know, the home's heating.
Correct. Yeah.
So it's not, you know, this wouldn't be a blanket, you know, totally fossil fuel free heating source for your home or your building or whatever, but with that as the, you know, the fossil fuel for primary for 85%.
Right, and like a pretty typical example is putting in a hybrid natural gas heat pump system, you know, forced hot air system, where there's a certain set point, and when the temperature gets down below a certain amount, where the heat pump is not working as efficiently as it could, then the natural gas kicks in. And so this would require the system to be set so that 85% of the time the heat pump is supplying the heat, and then the last 15% the natural gas kicks in, or at a minimum, like the homeowner could set it to be, you know, so that it supplies 100% of the heat if they wanted to.
I was curious on your number 2 there about the exemptions, like, I was kind of puzzling, exemptions for single-family home additions. That's probably the easiest way to put a heat pump in, but I could see an exemption if your addition did not require you to replace your existing heating system. You know, then then I could see then it probably wouldn't even come into play, right? You have a heating system, you put an addition on, you don't do anything with your existing heating system. Then I could see not being required to replace your whole heating system. But I assume like ADUs and affordable housing, that is coming about more for the contention between the cost and adding new spaces, right? And that gets back to do you have an exemption for economic reasons or housing reasons? I have to say, I don't have an opinion on renewable natural gas. You seem to, Greta. Are you?
I do. I don't think we should make, I don't think that should be, classified within, necessarily classified within that. I think that, we should use, other sources, yeah.
Your neighbor just built a 5,700 square foot home. He heats it with a masonry heater, wood fire, masonry chimney.
It's non-fossil fuel,
There's no heat pumps in it.
but it's wood, right? Not,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, I didn't know what this, I mean, I know exactly what was in the 3 sentences that was in the Vermont natural gas about RNG, renewable natural gas, so that's all I did. It's hard to have an opinion.
I mean, so to be clear about that, Vermont Gas wanted the option, just to allow some flexibility, and, they've been kind of including renewable natural gas in their portfolio, and they charge a premium for it. It is a lot more expensive than just regular natural gas. It doesn't mean that renewable natural gas is flowing through the pipes to your house. It just means that you're paying for that attribute.
Like solar energy.
And given that it's significantly more expensive, in practice, it would probably rarely be used as an option.
You said that the Energy Committee didn't have a particular opinion about it, or didn't want to take a stance on it, is that correct?
Yeah.
Is there anybody representing Sustainable Williston that would be willing to talk about it? Yeah? Do you want to come up?
If it's time for additional other people to comment, I'll definitely comment.
I mean, we're talking about renewable natural gas, so if you want to come up and talk about it, that would be great. That would be helpful.
Thank you, Melinda.
She'll be back.
Yes, sorry, Melinda.
I think you all know me for the recording record and everything. I'm Reed Carr, Williston resident, serve on the Conservation Commission. I help organize the group of Williston residents who call themselves Sustainable Williston, an unofficial town group who brought the original petition forward to get this work started. So regarding your question, Greta, about renewable natural gas, one of the things that wasn't in the memo that struck me when I attended the Energy Committee meetings was a discussion about how that would be enforced, because the pipes you're connected to are the same pipes that deliver regular gas. And so it's really more of like a billing thing. It's not a system thing. So there's no way to know whether a year later or 2 years later, at least that I've heard, whether they're still paying for renewable natural gas. So for that reason, I was going to suggest that it's probably not manageable to enforce.
Thank you. That helps.
Marcy, did you have anything to add?
Well, I have a whole statement and I have a whole bunch of handouts to give you that might do better in the course of it, but I totally agree with what Reed has said, and I am going to address renewable and bio, those kind of fuels, but it may work better after Melinda's finished.
Yeah. So Melinda, you have more?
I think, I mean, I guess mainly, we're just looking for feedback at this point on what direction you want to go, considering all these things.
Yep, okay.
Just
great.
to finish that up, the only other thing on your memo that I did find intriguing, and I think you're getting the impression that I'd really like to go for this and put it in place if it's not completely economically not feasible, which I'm still would like to try harder to find some numbers. But the concept of requiring houses to be heat pump ready, and some kind of a fee for not going with the full solution that we could use for weatherizing houses. That would, to me, would be a plan B if something comes up, either legally we run into more trouble, or this really gets to be, it's going to keep us from doing the housing things we want. I found that as an intriguing kind of together, those two being an interesting plan B, but I think I want to at least try for plan A at this point. So.
Yeah, 'cause I believe Plan B is already a Vermont mandatory standard. Developers have to follow it. We also have, whether we have a developer building a housing, houses, or a private person building a house. I can give you examples on that. I got a friend who just built a 5,700 square foot house, our 60 walls, or our 60 ceiling, our 40 walls. He heats it most of the time with a masonry chimney, wood fired. He doesn't have any heat pumps. He doesn't have any natural gas. He doesn't need any of that. People that build their own house. If you owned 100 acres of land, Greta or Ted or Terry, would you want someone I don't think this standard should apply to you.
Well, I think there's a lot of environmental concerns with biomass fuel too, though. So and wood burning fuel. So it's yeah. I think it should personally apply to everybody, regardless of the acreage you own. But
if you build your own home, if you can heat a house like that with 6 or 7 cords of wood.
yeah. But again, there's a lot of environmental implications with heating with wood as well, with biomass fuels. So yeah.
Let's put that aside, and I think we're ready to hear from other people. Is that okay?
Ted, I'll finish my comments, and,
Yeah.
and I'll keep them brief, because I know you all are going to have additional time on this topic at future meetings, and I know Emily is waiting and has other things as well. So a couple things. This is a complex issue. When we created the petition to start talking about this, we did not know where it would go, and I think you all showed with your questions that everybody is familiar that this is a complex issue. Some of the dynamics at play, in terms of the equity issue, I think it's important to remember that people who are lower economic status are more likely to be renting, and so they don't have control over the heating systems that they get. So while there are certainly a need for affordable housing, creating affordable housing that means that in 20 years the renters are going to be getting charged more to cover the costs of a retrofit is a problem, in my view, from an equity lens. Regarding, Jean, your question about multifamily, the only thing that I've found in all the folks I've talked to in Burlington, South Burlington, and today I had phone conversations with Cambridge, Mass, to understand how it's gone there, because they've implemented and revised their policy. Domestic hot water in large multifamily buildings is still the only piece that there are real technology issues, depending on the site and the way the building is constructed. How do you use electric sources to effectively and cost effectively in terms of building, provide hot water to that. For that reason, I'll share with you all a little checklist of kind of my thoughts about the different aspects of a policy, but the only thing that I feel like might need to be adjusted from the Energy Committee's recommendations is that for large multifamily buildings, it might make sense that domestic hot water not be required to be 100%. We have to remember that the cost to retrofit, I think, Mike, you're familiar with this because you added heat pumps to your home. The cost to retrofit is quite high. We're doing it to our home right now, and I know that without multiple solid incomes in our family, we would not be able to even think about doing that. So that's another reason why it's so important to do it up front. And I agree with Melinda, the data is really tricky to sift through in terms of what is the cost impact, in part because these technologies have come about during a time when we had a pandemic, supply chain issues, labor shortages, and housing markets that are just all over the place in terms of demand. So it's really hard to pick through the data and figure out, okay, when policies go into place and we can actually do A/B testing between before the policy and after the policy. There's so many other factors at play that it's hard to tell how much it increases the price. But everybody that I've spoken to have said it's either equivalent or slightly higher. The cost of retrofit is way higher. I've talked to many other towns about what they do, and so far the feedback has been if they were to go back and do it again, they wouldn't provide a waiver. They wouldn't call a primary heating source 85% because it implies that you should only design your electric system to 85%, and then the last 15% you should put a secondary system in, which also doesn't really serve people very well. Renewable natural gas I covered. And one of the important things that I spoke today with a gentleman from Cambridge, Mass. About was the importance of giving time to do the stakeholder outreach and change management process. So any ordinance that's drafted, it really is good to give time for staff to work with developers and make sure that they have the resources available to them to be successful making the change. It is possible. It does require change, and developers are humans too. They don't want to change. They're like, I want to take the models that I used for my last development and use them for my next development. They're based on a natural gas heating system. It does require thinking in a new way, but we should help them get through that process because somebody said the other day, and it stuck with me, we have a housing crisis and a climate crisis. The housing crisis is not expected to be permanent. It will pass. The climate crisis is not going anywhere, and it's getting worse.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I'm Kim Horning-Marcy, resident of Williston, and for the past 5 years, I've done a deep dive into clean heat. So from the medical standpoint and from other standpoints. This past weekend, and before I get into my statement, I really want to appreciate the level of conversation you've already had about this issue. I really, really appreciate your thoughtfulness, and that's where we're going to go. This past weekend, it got down to -7, right? And I got up in the morning and I glanced at my indoor-outdoor thermometer, and poor baby, it said outdoors it was -58 degrees. It clearly wasn't working. But what was working in my house were my 2 air source heat pumps. My home was comfy. Now I want to tell you a more serious true story. Just a few weeks ago, I was talking with a friend, and we were thinking back to 2 years ago when the wildfire smoke bathed the East Coast with orange skies and really bad air pollution. And she said to me, Kim, a friend of mine in my work setting came to me and she wasn't feeling well. And then she began coughing up blood. And they had to rush her to the closest emergency center. She had asthma, and that air pollution from those wildfires was exacerbating her asthma to that point. So folks with asthma are the canaries in our climate change world. If you burn any fuel, whether it says fossil or bio or green or renewable, you are still producing huge amounts of CO2 which impact the climate, and that add a cost that is extreme for those experiencing the disasters. And it is also producing life-threatening air pollution that is very impactful to human health. Medical science is constantly advancing, and they currently talk about just one of the many air pollutants that burning fuels cause is PM 2.5. It's smaller, it's teeny tiny, smaller than a human hair, barely bigger than a virus. PM 2.5, medical science says absolutely no amount of it is healthy for human life. And yet everything we burn produces it. Not only does it exacerbate asthma, as my story explained to you, it's connected with worsening heart-lung disease, cancer,
And now, and I have all the scientific papers if you want them, it is now connected to dementia and mood disorders. When we move to systems that do not burn a fuel, we immediately improve human health. Immediately. The air pollution gets better. And when we also are moving to systems that don't burn a fuel, we are reducing the climate change. And whatever we can reduce is still absolutely critical. So if not now, when? There are many more creative ways to heat and cool our homes than the old status quo. Burning things costs hundreds of thousands of dollars to Vermonters in health care. It also costs now billions in terms of climate disaster. So, the state is not going to get a clean heat standard. The way it's turned out, neither the fossil fuel companies nor the environmentalists like the clean heat standard. So local is key. And to be true leaders for our children, I hope you will be inspired by South Burlington and Burlington, and possibly going even to a better standard than they have. So I have a number of handouts for you because I was severely concerned about some of the statements that were attached to your stuff. So I have my statement, which you can pass around.
Thank you.
This is an amazing solution. I'm sorry I don't have
Oh, watch out.
Oh, that's,
but they can maybe copy.
I think I actually have.
Thank you.
Oh, these are all the same.
Thank you.
Then there was very false information in the service and there's those heat pumps, there's the several ones on the lifespan, there's those heat pumps. There's lots of curiosity about biofuels. I can spend an hour telling you about biofuels, but
This
this is a short document that you can pass around that has a bunch of biofuels and this anything that burns. So, bio, green, renewable, it's all greenwashing. And I have lots more scientific papers if you need the absolute research.
Thank you.
I'm sorry. But, yeah, there's a lot of very solid scientific evidence behind stuff. And just as an aside, renewable natural gas is still 97% methane. Methane is 80 times more warming than CO2 the first 25 years.
Hi there. I'm Deborah Muccio, a Williston resident of 25 years, and we've raised our children in the Williston school system. I'm also a member of Sustainable Williston, and I'm here to urge you to support the Clean Heat Standard as proposed by the Energy Committee. Their recommendation is based on many hours of research on this topic, including consultation with experts and learning from South Burlington and Burlington. We are in a climate emergency, and I want to remind us all of those days in summer when we look up in the sky and it's orange with the smoke from wildfires from Canada, the West, and most recently, New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut. Those days where children are told to play inside in Vermont because the air quality is poor and dangerous. And I also want to remind us about the catastrophic flooding in Vermont 2 years in a row that has damaged homes and communities beyond repair, and how much recovery will cost taxpayers. On those disastrous days when we're wringing our hands wondering what can we do, the answer is to take immediate action to control what we can control and influence what we can't control. Through a clean heat standard, we can reduce emissions from the building sector and influence other municipalities to do the same. The clean heat standard can provide a piece of the solution toward the problem of climate change. Williston, like South Burlington and Burlington, can provide a leadership role in this and a model for other towns and cities across Vermont, New England, and the United States. Thank you for taking action for us and future generations.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Kevin Thorley, I'm the chair of the Energy Committee. I just want to quickly thank Melinda for the great presentation tonight and for putting up with the Energy Committee meeting after meeting after meeting after meeting as we drove her crazy with our finding the definitions of words, getting the right wording, and questioning every detail of what we put together. Two things I'd like to say. It's obviously, I think, disappointing to see misleading information making the rounds, whether whichever news source, social media, or whatever that we choose to engage with. As someone who's driven electric vehicles here in Vermont since 2017 and heated my home exclusively with cold climate heat pumps since 2019, I can tell you they work. I'm here. Despite what one of the public comments at the Energy Committee meeting said, my children do not, quote, dress like Eskimos around the house. We've been heating with cold climate heat pumps. This is the 6th winter, and we all know how cold January was, and February is not much warmer. They work. They've been working fine. That -8 morning that Kim mentioned, -18 a couple years ago, they've kept us warm. I think Reed made possibly one of the most important comments about this. And as I think about the clean heat proposal, this isn't about forcing a specific heating choice on someone. I think this is about opening choice to people. Today, there is no choice. If you move into a home in Williston, you move into a home heated with fossil fuels. By adopting the clean heat proposal in front of you, with whatever appropriate changes and the waiver and whatnot, we give people choice. We let them move into a home where they are not now on the hook to retrofit that home in 1 year, 5 years, 10 years, whenever they see fit. I did the retrofit in my home. I'll say we did the bare minimum retrofit for the home that we have. They work. I'd like to add another heat pump or so, which would only increase the cost. It's not a case of the heat pump's not being able to operate in cold temperatures. It's like any other heating system. You have to have the right capacity of the heating system in terms of BTUs to match the home. It's expensive to do a retrofit. This proposal will set up people to move into homes that they do not need to retrofit. And I think that cost needs to be taken into account. Whether the clean heat standard passes at the state level this year or not, or in 5 years, or whenever, the trajectory is clear. And by continuing to build fossil fuel heated homes, we are locking people in to having to pay that out-of-pocket expense to do the retrofit themselves on a likely more expensive home equity loan or out of their own pocket, as opposed to building it into the cost of the home itself. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to give input? Okay. So Melinda, we were, yeah.
I have someone online.
Oh, okay, great. Yeah, I'm sorry.
I just checked it. Hey, David, I'm going to connect you just a moment.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
Hi, so I'm David Howell. I'm a Williston resident since 2017 and a member of Sustainable Williston. And I just wanted to make a comment regarding the long-term operating costs of running a heat pump. I know that there's some interest been expressed in getting some better numbers on this, but one thing that I think often I hear in these kinds of discussions is the assumption that natural gas prices are going to stay how they are indefinitely. And I think the volatility of energy costs need to be considered as well. Natural gas prices probably would have shot up quite a bit over the last couple decades if there hadn't been some changes in the drilling technology with fracking to make them natural gas more accessible. Europe has seen geopolitical circumstances change the price of natural gas. I think there's potential for that in North America as well, even though the US is a major producer of natural gas. Whereas with electricity, there's a wide variety of sources that can provide energy via electricity, some of which we can put on our own rooftops. So I think there's an element of Williston Vermont residents being able to have some self-reliance if they have heating systems powered by electricity, as opposed to natural gas, whereas natural gas locks us into a potentially volatilely priced fuel with infrastructure that itself could be subject to disruption with ongoing climate disaster. So I just wanted you all to consider that when thinking about the costs and not just assume that the natural gas status quo is going to last forever.
Thank you, David. Eric, anybody else online?
Nope, no one else.
So, Melinda, we were pestering you with questions. I don't know if that gave you the guidance that you're here for. So let me ask, did it give you the guidance you're here for?
I think so, yeah. So my impression is that you would like to move forward with some kind of ordinance. You want more information about cost of inspection services, and a waiver provision option that is not like the one that's spelled out in this memo, but something different, not based on economics.
Yeah.
Did I miss anything?
This may be something you can just clarify for me, because I'm a little confused, because Mike seems to know what he's talking about in an area I don't. But how much of this is, like these state RBES stretch code? Is that, like, there's a recommendation here that we adopt those, but if there's state codes, don't we already have to do them? I'm a little confused by that.
Yeah, they are state codes. They're not really enforced. So South Burlington has adopted the RBES stretch code into its bylaw, but it's merely a statement that, you know, it's adopting the state code as a standard. And I'm not sure how they enforce that. But, you know, I think it would just add a little emphasis to the already existing state code and perhaps provide a mechanism of enforcement.
It's just, at some point, I would like to, when you come back, I guess I would just like some clarity on where we're just duplicating what already exists versus what are we adding that's more.
Well,
if that makes any sense.
Yeah, to be clear, right now, the residential building energy standards, the base code applies to all new residential construction. The stretch code only applies to projects that are subject to Act 250 permits. And now especially, there's going to be less Act 250 jurisdiction overall. I mean, there's going to be fewer projects going forward that are subject to Act 250. So it would be, adopting stretch code for all new construction, which would be different.
So many things to learn tonight.
I'm sorry.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I think something to account. I really appreciated Dave Howell's point too about the cost of natural gas, and I think given the climate nationally right now, it is important to note that most of our natural gas in Vermont comes from Canada, and so that is just something to think about and add to the discussion. So.
Most of our
Electricity does too.
And most of our electricity, yeah.
Well, I've always thought the Canadians should be put in their place. Glad to see that finally happening.
Yeah, but I think that it's important to just note that, that rising costs may be a sooner rather than later reality for some of these things, and so,
But the more,
again, to speak to issues of equity and environmental justice.
Yep. I did get, I don't know if other people, I got an email from Debbie Ingram earlier about affordable housing and the impact it would have on it. So if you could just give us some data on that as well. I know you already have a little bit, but
I think rather than giving you an answer, we've just nibbled around the edges to narrow the focus for all the questions we're going to ask you next time.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
That's a process.
the cost of electricity in some places in the country is already 50% more than it is in Vermont.
I wouldn't have expected that.
Staff will work to address those questions and other things that come up. That's back in your agenda. Probably might be a March, April timeline. Yeah, goes back to you.
clinics and my gratitude as well to the Energy Committee for a lot of really hard work on this and really thoughtful consideration and their continued commitment to advancing, our town as a leader, in addressing the climate crisis within Vermont and the country. So, thank you.
Addressing climate change is the important thing. Thank you for all your work.
Yep. Okay. Okay. All right.
Thanks, Melinda.
Thank you.
Are you still here?
Yeah. You wanna?
We're not getting ready yet.
Planning heavy meeting today.
Turns her hat around.
So let's go on to the next agenda item. That would be Housing Trust Fund Policy. Melinda, hello.
Sure.
So-
I'll try to keep this as brief as I can.
Good luck.
Okay, so the Housing Committee has been working on developing a policy for the Housing Trust Fund, which we brought to you at a prior meeting. So I think you didn't really have many questions at that time, but you did want us to seek a legal opinion, which we did. We had our legal counsel review the draft policy and provide some recommendations, proposed edits. So I have brought back the policy with those edits, in-track changes. Basically, I provided in my memo the substantive, kind of the changes or the questions that were, that legal counsel asked and that you should consider, I think. So one question was, there's a proposed program called Housing Retention, the purpose of which is to enable people already housed to remain housed. So in the draft policy, there's an option to use funding on an emergency basis. So in other words, up to $2,000 worth of funding could be granted to somebody in need of that, in dire need of that funding, with just the approval of town manager, not going through the Housing Committee's review. And so the question is, does the select board want to use the funding for those type of emergency situations? And I guess the con of that is just it might be subject to kind of waste. If it's a decision that has to be made like in a short period of time, it could be just subject to wasting funding or whatever. But
and what would the cap be on like that particular allotment? Like, would there be a dollar amount? I know the 10,000 was like the limit for the assistance, but like for this particular portion of it, would that 10,000 still be the limit, or
it would be
smaller?
up to $2,000.
2,000.
Yeah.
On the emergency situation, the thing that sounds like I'm cruel when I say this, but if there's something that requires action in less than 2 weeks of a time frame, or somebody's going to lose their housing, then there's a very good chance that there's a big, significantly deeper story behind that situation where somebody is way behind on their rent or way behind on their mortgage, and either $2,000 isn't going to do much, or it will do something for a very brief period of time. And that's where that's where my head went on this concept.
I was a little bit there also with the, even the 10,000 number. It's like, is this a continuing problem and we're just keeping the person housed for a couple of months, or is this something that's emergency medical needs and they just need to get out from under a small, but I don't know where that decision gets made. The 2,000 is almost Health and Human Services kind of money as opposed to housing.
Yep, and the emergency situation where somebody's about to lose their housing, if we're talking about an eviction, that's been a slow-moving, powerful but slow-moving train. coming towards somebody for a while. And I don't know that that's gonna, you know, I don't know how long-term our help would be. So, and mortgage situation, you know, it's not like, you know, the silent films in the 1930s where, you know, Snidely Whiplash is there to foreclose on grandma and she only missed one payment. You know, so I don't see where that could actually come up in a way that would be a good use of the town's money.
It's actually interesting, Ted, because it's almost, there's the question of, is it a good use of the town's money to keep somebody housed for a short amount of time versus, is it the proper use of these funds?
Yeah.
Right? I mean, if we wanted to take them out of the social action fund because we need, I know the town has some money to help people who are in dire emergency straits, that might be a more appropriate venue for an emergency housing issue. But this fund is set up to improve our housing situation in town. Emergency doesn't quite seem to fit. I see your point, kind of.
I
We
think
have a resident assistance line in the budget. I think it has about $1,000 funding in it annually. Sometimes we have one or two requests to help with like a heating bill or something like that we provide to help a resident out. But yeah, there's something like that in the operating budget.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's real important that we keep people in their homes that belong in their homes. Now, there's a lot of people that run into tough luck. Sometimes just a helping hand is all they need to keep going. But there's also a difference between giving someone a helping hand and someone who, you know, the town should have some type of guidelines as to who they give it to, because I could probably come up with 100 examples of people that need to be moved out of their homes too, you know? I mean, we see in the news all the time. You know, we just saw recently, you know, Community Housing Trust had a problem, and I can think of other examples of people that lost their Section 8 vouchers for very good reasons. I don't believe that. I think it'd be a hard sell for me to see someone that lost their Section 8 housing voucher to take hard-earned money from people in the town of Williston to keep them there another couple of months. So some type of guidelines would be very important also on rental units.
I think I probably have, maybe the lone dissenter here. I do think that keeping people in housing should be a priority of our housing committee, and I do think that is, I do see that as a valuable use of this funding. I do agree, though, on the point that that I don't foresee using it for emergency situations. I would prefer that the housing committee, you know, that there would be time for them to review the case and to, you know, support them in coming up with a plan of action for long-term sustainability, so that we know that these funds are, you know, really going to keep them in this housing beyond this next payment or beyond this, and not just, you know, a stopgap for 1 month or something. But again, I do see it as important and one of many steps that needs to be taken in addressing the housing crisis is keeping people in their homes, in their existing homes. Because once they're out of that home, we know that then a whole nother slew of challenges exist for them. But that would be my personal note, would just be I don't see it being used in like true emergency short term, like, you know, having the, you know, Eric approve it. I think that the housing committee should make those decisions.
Mm-hmm. And I wouldn't ask you to rewrite or anything, but the housing retention program itself, I think, is where I was pointing. I agree, Red. I want somebody loses their housing in this world, they're not going to get back anytime soon. So, short of something illegal, I think I do appreciate that, but I was interested when I was reading over the housing retention program. It says applicant has provided documentation of financial need, you know, is part of the scoring a viable path to getting out of their situation, you know, that's, I'm not gonna ask you to rewrite something, someone's making decisions on these, but I think that that would be an important thing. And it might be that, you know, they don't get the whole, maybe they get 3 months worth and so they can find another living situation, but it was just struck me that not everybody has a path out of dire financial need.
I can think of someone in particular right now who is living in a home that they own and potentially no heat in the wintertime. You know,
I think
don't-
that can be taken care of. Let's talk afterwards.
Right, I just wonder, you know, I mean, there's other avenues for that, I
Right.
would assume.
Yeah, yes,
CVOEO, have them contact them.
yeah.
Excuse me?
Have them contact CVOEO.
CVOEO is the organization that.
EIEIO.
The Champlain Valley Office of Economic Opportunity.
Yeah, there's gotta be people to help,
There are.
like in that
For heat,
situation.
yep.
Heating is a big issue in Vermont, and there are a lot of programs specifically for that.
People that have no money to fix a furnace or something.
I'm impressed, though. You sent this thing to the lawyers and they only had two things to check. That's pretty good. I only saw 2 things that were redlined, right? Oops, am I the right one? Well, they're blue in mine, but.
Yeah, keeping people in their homes, I believe, is important, especially with such a lack of shortage of housing.
Yep.
There's only so many people.
So I guess the second bullet is somewhat related in that, does the select board, in the housing retention program, do you want to restrict funding to those who are being evicted for their, from their home or whose home is under foreclosure?
I'm of the opinion that, I mean, circumstances are so different from one situation to the next, that I wouldn't want to exclude people who are being evicted wholesale. I think that there are so many situations in which that there may be circumstances way beyond their control. And again, I would want to leave that up to the housing committee to decide, you know, if that was, if that was an appropriate use of those funds.
I agree. I'd trust the housing committee to make
Yeah.
that decision.
And then the last point that the lawyer had was, does the select board want to consider changing the standard of perpetually affordable to just setting a limit of 30 to 40 years? So the Housing Trust Fund ordinance uses a standard of long-term affordability, and then it also mentions that that perpetual affordability ought to be prioritized in disbursement of funds. And the town's inclusionary zoning regulations require perpetual affordability.
So, I mean, so within the town, inclusionary zoning, you know, perpetually affordable doesn't end at 30 to 40 years, right? So
Yeah, correct.
I don't see any reason to deviate from that in this, then.
If this was the only thing we had that said perpetually, I would
Yeah.
probably agree, but if that's
Yeah.
not uncommon with other things we do in the town.
Yeah.
I think that was well written.
Yeah, uniformity of language is important. We get it.
It was at the end of every paragraph, I think.
So those were the main questions, and if you have any other feedback about the policy in general, I would take that feedback. The Housing Committee's had a discussion about this, and is recommending that, and I didn't include this in your memo, it's recommending that the town launch 2 programs in FY26, Housing Retention and Housing Improvement Program, because they feel that those 2 programs could have the biggest impact with the amount of money that's in the fund currently. And they're recommending that the funding be divided evenly between those two programs, and that in the first year, the practice should be to limit individual awards for housing retention to $5,000 and for housing improvement to $10,000. But as the fund grows over time, you could add additional programs and raise the levels of funding.
And the secondary conversation, once the, should the board adopt this policy, is the fiscal agent side of it with the fund. Do we want to have a minimum that's kept in this fund year to year? I think we talked about kind of a separate allocation from the reserve to use for the programs each fiscal year that the board would make in May or June for that year ahead. And certainly you can always amend that through the years. It's it's a designated fund, but just some parameters of we don't want this fund, we don't want to zero this fund out. We want to keep 25,000 that's invested, or however we want to draw it up. But there'll be more revenue to this fund with a payment in lieu of provision that we have for inclusionary zoning as well, from just the seed money we put in. That was, I think, 40,000 or so over a few budget cycles.
I don't really know why we'd need to have a budget. If we ran it dry, next people would have to wait. But meanwhile, you're kind of banking money that could be helping people.
Yeah.
Maybe it wouldn't make it 25 if you want to, for some reason, to keep 5 or maybe 10, but it's not like there's obligations that we'll have to make up in the general fund. We just won't have money to grant.
Yeah, just as a question of policy.
Yeah. Since you did kind of open it to the whole things, I did have 2 suggestions, and maybe they're in here. I read it carefully this time. I didn't read it carefully last time. But one is we talk about them people can pay back with inflation, funded adjusted for inflation. You probably should spell out what index we're using, just so you don't get in that argument. And the other thing is, anytime you have like an evaluation criteria, it probably should be really clear that the evaluation criteria is advisory or subject. Yeah, it's going into the decision, but the final decision is being made by the committee.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Thank you.
A lot of pages to remember.
Okay.
So, does that give you enough of a homework assignment?
Thank you.
All right.
Just kind of have to watch reruns to remember everything we told them.
You get to stay here still, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
More moments. Yay.
Let's get on to the next item. Development
Thanks, Melinda.
Bylaw Amendment B Home Act.
Emily's going to join for the next couple zoning bylaw.
All right, thank you. I'll try to keep this brief. Okay, so on January 21st, the Planning Commission had held a duly warned public hearing during which they voted to recommend that a collection of proposed bylaw changes be considered for adoption by the Select Board. Adoption of these changes requires the approval of the Select Board after a warned public hearing, and a draft document with all the proposed changes has been provided for you. So this is just an informational session for you. We're going to briefly go over the proposed amendments. One hearing track has to do with amendments related to the recently adopted Act 181 called the Be Home Act, which became law on June 17th, 2024. The Act's general goal is to increase the supply of housing in Vermont, made significant changes to Act 250 and Vermont statutes governing limits on the way municipalities can regulate residential development. So some of these provisions had to do with parking. Some had to do with dwelling types, specifically that municipalities must now allow duplexes everywhere the residential uses are allowed. and multi-unit dwellings of up to 4 units were, in areas provided by water and sewer and where, that are zoned for residential uses. And multi-unit dwellings up to 4 units must be allowed on the same size lot as a single unit dwelling. There's a provision about unrelated occupants, which our bylaw currently doesn't prohibit unrelated persons from residing in the same dwelling unit. On timing of decisions, a DRB public hearing must be warned within 120 days of receiving a completed application for development. The threshold for appeals has been raised from 10 to 20 petitioners in a municipality, and character of the area appeals are not allowed if the project includes affordable housing. The second phrase of that statement in your memo is not correct. It's anywhere, that the project could be anywhere if it includes affordable housing. Appeals based on character of the area are not allowed. Hotels and motels converted to permanently affordable housing are now added to the list of partially exempted development. And so municipalities are now required to amend their bylaws to meet these new limitations, and must act as if these provisions have currently been adopted into their bylaws. So most of the amendments are designed to meet the requirements of the above provisions, and also to add clarity and consistency to the way that these provisions are addressed in the bylaw, and also to correct other errors and inconsistencies that we found along the way. So Chapter 1, there was just a provision related to COVID-19 pandemic extensions. We decided it was time to get rid of that. Under Chapter 4, the state changed the definition of accessory on-farm business to include the sale of agricultural products produced on any farm, not just the farm to which the business is accessory. So we added that to our bylaw. We added to the list of partially exempted development, accessibility modifications, and hotels and motels converted to permanently affordable housing. And we added a proposed provision to permit the construction of multi-unit dwellings with up to 4 units administratively, rather than having them go to the DRB.
Can I just stop you for a minute? I read all these, so do we need to have Melinda read them to us again, or is there just anything you want to point out? I did read, this one I did read carefully, so just to save a little time because it's running behind schedule.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea.
Anything else in here that jumped out that I might have misunderstood when I read it? They all seem pretty straightforward.
If you have any questions about them, I'm happy to take questions.
I didn't.
Most of those we've seen before, except the cleanup stuff that
Yeah.
Emily's been taking care of. So I think I'm gonna.
I really want Emily to explain these maps to me, because I want to see how many times she can say the names of all these zones without messing them up.
So with that, I'd move to warn a public hearing to receive comment on proposed amendments to the Williston Unified Development Bylaw covering Act 181 compliance and changes to the zoning map.
Second.
Any discussion on the motion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
There are no nays. The ayes have it. That-
Great job by the zoning department.
Yeah, holy cow. I had to look something up just in the whole document, because I had a question on it, and it was like, oh, who reads all these red things underneath?
I actually did look up what home, what it stands for. Housing opportunities made for everyone.
What's the B part?
What's that?
What was the BE part? I've always wondered what that was, why it's
I don't know. But I would say that I get the political and PR reason that you have to, that the legislature comes up with these things.
So it's a little bit of a stretch, this one?
I'd say mediocre. That was mediocre. Okay, so that brings us to the next item, development bylaws amendment, village zoning.
Thanks, Ted. And I do want to note that in the room with us this evening, we have John Marcotte, who is the Vice Chair of the Historic and Design Advisory Committee. So on January 21st, the Planning Commission held their public hearings on duly warned bylaw amendments. And this package of amendments does have the full support of the Historic and Design Advisory Committee, also referred to as HDAC or HAC. These amendments conform to the goals and actions outlined in the 2018 Village Master Plan. And this proposal balances village scale and character, historic preservation, and creates new opportunity for residential and economic vitality of this beloved little zoning district. This package of amendments began back in 2021 and 2022 with the municipal planning grant. We made a lot of good progress in that time frame, and the general feedback from the public and planning commission was quite positive, but there are a lot of work items that came out of that iteration to restructure things, clarify things, change a couple standards, which brings us to the proposal that's in front of you tonight. We are making some changes to other zoning district chapters. Some are village zoning district specific, others apply to the entire town. For example, we are allowing ADA ramps as a minor work project everywhere in town. We're clarifying some of the permit thresholds in Chapter 4. In the village zoning district and as well as in the residential zoning district, we're allowing up to 9 dwellings be served by a private driveway, where today up to 5 are allowed. That would be in support of multifamily or infill projects on existing small driveways, without having to require them to go to a 64 feet street right-of-way build standard. In the parking chapter, we're right-sizing parking. Today, the DRB has some provisions to have flexibility for parking, and we are enhancing that flexibility. In the village, you can also have more spaces that are for compact cars, and that there are some more standards for smaller parking lots. In terms of Chapter 16 maintenance, providing some standards, more standards around solid waste containers and where they can be placed. And in the village, we are adding sound mitigation requirements for solid waste containers. This was a really big point of feedback when thinking about commercial and mixed uses in the village. Noise is a big one, and dumpster slamming is a major complaint that we heard about. So there are slow close lids, or basically like rubber pool noodles that you put around the edges, so when things close, it's not as loud and piercing of a sound. And I framed that just for the village zoning district. If it pilots well here, that standard could be adopted town-wide. In terms of density, we're already preempted at 5 units per acre because this is a water and sewer service area. And the provision is that parcels less than 2 acres don't have density on a units per acre metric. This really benefits small properties where you might be converting an existing dwelling to multiple units, or just the numbers don't pencil out and you're at like 2.95 when you could have 3 units. And there are other provisions in the village zoning district chapter that inherently limit the number of units that can be on a property. This is similar to how things are done in the form-based code district, but on a much smaller village scale. Residential improvements, we're deleting the submission requirements for fences because that's in the Chapter 42. And we're making a lot of provisions for landscaping that are clarified in Chapter 42 as well. Outdoor lighting, this applies town-wide, but we're limiting the color temperature. Form-based code allows lights that either are, or prohibits lights that are either too warm or too cold and blue to kind of a normal range, and we're adopting that town-wide. We're also creating some village-specific limits on the height of wall-mounted fixtures, parking lot pole-mounted fixtures, and really pushing parking lots towards pedestrian-oriented bollard lights. There is a particular exemption written in for uses like town hall, the library or a church, and the schools, places that are inherently going to have large parking lots. But the intent with this lighting provision is that if you're doing a commercial or mixed-use site in the village, that your lighting is really tailored to be focused on your parking and pedestrian ways and not illuminate the whole area. Signs townwide, we're saying master sign plans can be administrative. This saves staff in the DRB a lot of headache on something that's really minor and clerical in nature. We don't allow internally illuminated signs. The size limits are up to 8% of the building facade area, so our sign standards are very strict as they are, and allowing them administratively saves a lot of time. And we're allowing portable signs like the little sandwich boards that businesses like to have. Chapter 30, we're renaming the National Register Historic District to the Williston Village Historic District. This was a recommendation from the State Historic Preservation Office, just to make it clear that our standards are our standards and the national regime and is a separate thing for clarity. But I'll refer to it as Historic District interchangeably. And then we are adding some chapter definitions, minimally visible, primary or principal structure, clarifying public way, and then the determination of contributing structure information is self-contained within Chapter 42. I do want to note that when you're thinking about density or conversions of existing buildings to multifamily residential, the existing definition for a dwelling in Chapter 46 limits the size no smaller than 300 square feet, which is a small studio apartment, and also has configuration requirements. So you might recall historic buildings back in the day where you walk into your unit through the bathroom, or a demising wall was put in and renders the historic window unusable. So that provision was adopted several years ago so that, yes, you can convert a structure to multiple units, but they need to be functional and normal and not weird.
That technical term?
Yeah. So before I jump into the meat and potatoes of Chapter 42, I want to pause there for any questions on the other bylaw chapters.
But maybe I'm jumping ahead of the gun, I don't know, but when you talk about the village zone, changing from adding more accessory units and things to the village zone, is it going to be architecturally based on the historic district? Is that a requirement of the new building?
Yes, there are provisions that how new buildings are sited in the village, that they maintain size and massing of historic character. They don't have to look historic, but they will have to match the character of the village.
And like someone wants to put a fence in their yard, if it's a front yard or backyard, or they have a slate roof that they want to replace, the front of the roof, front street facing, or the rear facing, is that something that's being looked at as being, acceptable? A roof is a great
I
example.
think those were two questions. I was going to ask the roof question because that's come up before.
Yeah.
Was that discussed?
Yeah, the fence one, we are permissive on materials, and we are saying that fences don't need that historic certificate of appropriateness. And when I jump into my Chapter 42 slides, we'll go in a little bit more detail on that one. The second question about slate, that's probably the hottest topic in this entire chapter. The requirement in this bylaw is that slate be replaced with slate. And the current Chapter 42 in Appendix H does not say that. It just says respect the original character. And that's created a lot of challenge and frustration for the Development Review Board and the Historic Design Advisory Committee working with property owners when there's been a vague standard. The past couple years, the DRB's precedent has been to require slate be replaced with slate. They did entertain a request for a synthetic slate and ultimately chose to require authentic slate instead of the alternative synthetic, and that's across the street at the orthodontist's office when they were renovating. In total, there are 9 properties in the Village Zoning District with slate roofs. Town Hall, where we are now, Old Brick Church, for residential properties, including a residential property that's rented, so it does have opportunity for tax credits. And then the last two are businesses, the orthodontics office and Ridgeline Real Estate office.
So it's still left confused in this?
No, it's explicitly clear that slate must be replaced with slate.
I would think, and it's just, I don't know, John could answer better than me, if a house had slate on one side, and asphalt on the other side, is that the roof, the weight balance, does that make a difference, or? I would wonder, too, you know?
That's what we've heard in reviews. When the orthodontics office, I know that when they had to replace their slate, they even had to truss up that existing roof just to manage the weight of the old slates were sagging. So if you have different material weights on each side, that makes it challenging for it to be equally weighted.
And then someone told me in Burlington, the policy in Burlington is slate on the street side and asphalt on the back side. I don't know if that's true or not.
I don't know. I can't quite speak to Burlington.
Right, I don't know.
Yeah. If you guys are ready, I can jump over to more village-specific things.
Yeah.
So we're in the Village Zoning District today. On the north side, it's bounded by the Allen Brook. It contains the school property. On the south side, it's bounded by Interstate 89. And it extends on the east to the property line with the cemetery about. And then on the west, the Cirque right-of-way interstate. So the bottom of Southridge, the bottom of the hill by Southridge Road, that area is in the Village Zoning District. The condos at Timothy Way off of Williston Road, those are not in the village. On this map in pink is the National Register Historic District, AKA the Williston Village Historic District, and in yellow is the additional review area. So things that aren't changing, we're not changing the districts, the boundaries of this district. We're not changing the boundaries of the National Register Historic District. And maximum building height is not changing. In fact, the way we calculate it for some properties that sit a little bit lower and might have to mound up a lot of dirt, they might have less height to play with because we're calculating it based on existing grade rather than mounding up to a finished grade. And I do want to note that state law does preempt us on building height for affordable housing developments. They get that extra story. We're not changing density for parcels greater than 2 acres. We're also not changing anything about growth management or inclusionary zoning per Chapter 11. So the permit thresholds in the Village Zoning District, unlike other places in town, properties are required to get a certificate of appropriateness. This is basically a head nod that the activity complies with the design and development standards for the historic district, and the DRB is putting on their National Park Service hat and saying, yep, this follows the preservation standards and guidelines of the National Park Service. We're adding some nuance to the Village Zoning District by creating a difference between a contributing structure and a non-contributing structure. So a contributing structure is what you think of as a historic property. In the village, particularly, it's from the 1800s or early 1900s. It's probably on the National Register Survey or the Historic Sites and Structures Survey. It's what you think of as a historic home that is contributing to the historic character. In contrast, a non-contributing structure is something that, by virtue of its age, period built, or style, it does not contribute to that historic character. So typically built after 1940, typically less than 50 years old. And the reason this contributing versus non-contributing standard came to be is it's really frustrating to apply design and historic preservation standards to a 1960s or 1980s raised ranch or an old outhouse building that, yeah, it was built in the early 1900s or late 1800s, but it doesn't have character defining features and it's falling over. So the intent was to really differentiate what's key to the historic character and what has a little bit more flexibility.
Is that a judgment then? It's not it's not an age thing, it's a judgment. Because I was going to ask like a barn or an outbuilding or something, but
Yep, it's a judgment based on its age, period built, architectural style, and alterations over time and other factors.
Great, thanks.
What would the sheep barn at the Catamount be classified as?
It's not
contributing or
in the
non-
village.
Fortunately, it's not in the village zoning district. But I do have a case study coming up that'll help you wrap your heads around it. So this determination letter, it's like an administrative permit in terms of noticing. They get a Z sign to post on the property. There's a 15-day appeal period. It's a zoning administrator decision, so that appeal would be quite easy to the Development Review Board. The zoning administrator may refer to the HDAC, and the HDAC may also refer it to the DRB. You know, where we're making that judgment call and it's getting pretty tricky, it might not be something that I or Matt are comfortable making that decision on. It would get referred to committee review. It can be initiated by the property owner or the applicant or the zoning administrator. And if there's not enough information known about the property, then the default would be we're treating this as a contributing structure. It expires after 3 years, and the ZA can reconsider if new information is provided. I do want to note that currently and as proposed, we do not charge fees for certificate of appropriateness, and we will not charge fees for this determination letter. I think that's been an unspoken but longstanding town policy that we're treating historic properties with a little bit more scrutiny, so we'll cut them a break by not charging fees like all the other permit requirements. So that determination letter, it helps property owners by getting big questions answered before they invest in design, preservation, and engineering. Can I demolish and rebuild my house? Can I remove the summer kitchen that was an addition to my 1880s house? Do I need to treat my structure like a modern home or historic for how I plan a design or a remodel project? So it saves people a lot of heartburn if they know what path they're going to take with their property before they invest in a vision or a proposal. So the permit process, everybody starts with getting that determination letter. If your property is in that National Register Historic District, or AKA the Williston Village Historic District, you would get that certificate of appropriateness. And there's some little things that don't require that certificate of appropriateness. You go to the middle of the slide if you do not have if your property contains a contributing structure. So if you're in the historic district, everything's got to get that certificate. If you just have a contributing structure but you're elsewhere in the village, you might not need that certificate. And what this tries to explain at the very bottom is that the permit thresholds are the same now as everywhere else in town for an administrative approval or a discretionary permit approval. So sometimes that certificate of appropriateness is issued on its own, sometimes it's with an administrative permit, and then sometimes it's a discretionary permit, just depending on, are you proposing a fence or a backyard shed, or are you doing a brand new subdivision? There are activities that do not need that certificate of appropriateness, like repair, maintenance, or identical replacement, interior renovations or floor plan changes, small accessory sheds, portable structures, site plan modifications like relocating a driveway, landscaping, access, decks that are minimally visible or invisible from the street, solar installations on a non-contributing structure, and then, of course, accessibility modifications. And the star denotes activities that may still require an administrative permit, but don't need to go through that extra level of review for historic certificate of appropriateness.
What about a solar structure on a contributing structure? A solar structure on a contributing structure?
That's the very last slide. We will get to that one. So the practical difference, if you have a contributing structure, demolition is a discretionary permit, and there's a lot of rigorous standards that need to be proven. Demolition by neglect standards apply. Renovation and remodel follows the rehabilitation and restoration historic preservation principles. Whereas if you have a non-contributing structure, it's an administrative permit to demolish it. You can go, I like to think of it as like going full HGTV on your remodel. If you want to make your raised ranch look, like an HGTV remodel, you can do that. I'm totally blanking on the TV show, Chip and Joanna Gaines, that one. And you're also not subject to that demolition by neglect standard, but I do want to note that everywhere in town, we do have the dangerous buildings provision in Chapter 18. So to help you think about this contributing versus non-contributing, I'm looking at the Town Hall complex. So the two historic buildings would be where we are today, Town Hall and the Town Hall Annex. I do want to note that both of those buildings have additions. So the back portion of Town Hall was added on in 1987. And then the annex where my office is located in that single-story side of the building was added in like the 50s or 60s. The police station is also brand new, built in the early 2000s. And then there's a couple accessory sheds behind the police station and behind the annex. The way I have things worded is with that flexibility, so that determination expires after 3 years. So if nothing changes about this bylaw in 100 years, that addition might be considered historic because it was done very nicely with wood clapboard siding, and it has a slate roof on the addition, and it was built in a really high-value way. Whereas where my office is located is over 50 years old, but it was built initially as a public works garage, has 3 different ceilings in it, and has seen a lot of modification over time where, you know, if you think about it through the lens of if that side addition were to come down and you were able to restore those 2-story windows that were original to the building, you might be improving the historic character of the structure. So we're not making any changes to these buildings, but we see them all the time, so I thought they were a good case study as we think about the rest of the standards. So green means there's a standard that's based on where a property is located. So uses are based on what road they have frontage on. The red means that they apply to all structures, but there are some special circumstances, so standards for new construction and additions, materials, design and modifications, mechanical equipment and utilities, and the last one's solar. So for new construction and additions, there's some flexibility and for street-facing facades. So the adding like a porch or an addition onto the front of the home would really depend on, does that match the character of that structure? If you have a more modern home or of a historic era where a front porch was common, you might be able to do that. But we want to maintain the historic character of the street-facing facades on historic homes. Most of them wouldn't have enclosed porches or, you know, a bump-out addition for a kitchen on the front of the home. There's also flexibility for minimally visible facades and non-contributing structures in the historic district. So if you're doing things that are to the side or the rear where they're not going to be seen, the review process has a little bit more flexibility to what the style is, what the materials are that's being used in those circumstances. So demolition and demolition by neglect. Demolition requires a discretionary permit from the Development Review Board. The applicant must prove undue financial hardship, and the standard that we're using that is pretty pro forma across the nation in terms of what types of financial information they would need to provide. The DRB may require a demolition delay, and then they have a lot of options for how they structure an approval. So they could say, okay, retain the main core, retain town hall, but you can tear off the addition, or retain this portion of the building. They may condition it that you try to salvage or reuse some of the materials inside or outside. So maybe you list them for availability in local or national markets. Hey, I have this great indoor wood paneling or this cupola that could still be repurposed. As well as soliciting documentation like photos and oral history about the history of the property. Demolition by neglect also follows pretty national standards for how these things are handled in historic districts. Demolition by neglect would be a zoning violation process. And I do want to note that if we were to adopt this, I don't foresee any properties in the village being subject to this provision. Given the market conditions and how things have been going over the years, people do a very good job of upkeeping their properties with repairing roofs, replacing windows, repainting siding. There are a couple places where property owners, trim has rotted out and they repaired it, so I'm not seeing a situation where we approve this bylaw and then tomorrow 5 properties are in violation. This is more of a backstop standard that most historic districts have and was called for in the village master plan adoption. Dimensional standards. This applies to all properties. Generally, we're still preserving that green belt within the Williston Road setback where structures are set farther back, but there's a lot of variation in Williston Road where things come a lot closer. So we're allowing more context sensitivity. If you're near Old Stage Road where the little corner store used to be, the buildings are right up on the road. If you're here in the middle by Town Hall, things are set back more like 30, 35 feet, up to 50 feet. And we're also creating a setback waiver to encourage access consolidation. So where you and your neighbor choose to share a driveway, you have a little bit more flexibility to help you with that. There's no change to the 150-foot setback to Interstate 89. This does impact a couple of properties where people have been interested in development, but the Historic Committee and the Planning Commission really felt that in all their years of discussion, not wanting to change that 150-foot setback. It's been longstanding, and getting homes closer to the highway feels problematic for noise and environmental and health reasons. We are adopting building footprint limits. So earlier I talked about going away with density on units per acre metric. You're still going to have to meet these pretty small building footprint limits. 2,000 square feet for a single mass, up to 6,000 square feet if it's a telescoping building pattern, so where you have different building masses rather than just one block. And then 3,500 feet for a rear lot detached structure. I do want to note that Town Hall and the police station and the school and the proposed library addition would all be way above that. And we do have a specific exemption for those types of uses in the civic exemption category in this chapter. And a building can be no more than 50 feet maximum length along a street frontage. So the intent, it's kind of like form-based code, but on a much smaller scale. We want small building footprints. We want them telescoping away from the street rather than having long blocks of buildings. If you have a long frontage on Williston Road, we want you to break that up with distinct buildings rather than, building a large apartment block. You still might be able to get a lot of units in there, but it's going to be in a building pattern that's much more compatible with the village and looks less like high density in Taft Corners. We already went over residential density, so I'll skip that one. Standards for non-residential uses. So right now, mixed uses are allowed everywhere in the village zoning district. And we are creating some nuance here. So minor uses can be everywhere. They're kind of like a souped-up home business, and I'll go into what that means in a minute. Major uses are only allowed on Williston Road, Old Stage Road, North Williston Road, and Oak Hill, the busier trafficked roads. And it means that the property has physical frontage, not just a driveway flag lot. So we are going from, rather than having a really short list of prohibited uses and me crushing people's dreams all the time with, I'm sorry, you can't put that use in this zoning district because it's not allowed on this really short list, to we're saying what's prohibited. So things like car dealerships, vehicle rental, big bulky things that you want in your industrial zoning district. And we're also prohibiting a lot of components of uses. So loading docks, big overhead doors, gated parking, things that national chains or a much larger commercial or retail use would want to have. A minor non-residential use, it doesn't have any outdoor sales, dining, or gathering areas for customers. So everything, for the most part, is happening inside. The DRB must make findings to allow outdoor work areas. So an outdoor work area, say you have an art gallery use, and you're going to teach painting classes outside. Okay, that's not going to be generating a lot of noise for the neighbors. If your use is going to be, teaching, your work area is going to be steel manufacturing, that's probably not going to work. So it's creating that nuanced threshold. Is this going to create a nuisance for the neighbors? And creating a lot of flexibility there, because market demands are always changing, and we want to be adaptive to what uses are of a popularity. Outdoor storage is also quite limited in size, as well as the number of parking spaces, and solid waste needs to be treated like a residential home.
Excuse me,
Mm-hmm.
the orthodontist building, that's in the village zone. They're allowed to have more than 6 parking places, I would assume?
Yes, that's a good point. They would be allowed to be a major non-residential use because they have that frontage on Williston Road. So a minor use would be if you're on Tower Lane, Village Grove, the back end of Slate Barn Drive. So if you're on one of those quieter side streets, you can have a commercial use, but it's more like a home business than it is an orthodontist's office or a restaurant, which is a great segue into the major non-residential uses. So you can have outdoor sales and display areas. Currently, we don't allow those at all in the village zoning district. So if you want to have bikes for sale, or a sale rack if you're a clothing store, you can have a little bit larger of an outdoor storage area. And you can have outdoor work areas as well, with those similar limitations and findings about what you're doing outside. Walk-up windows are allowed, thinking about ice cream, creamy stores. And then there are some provisions for company fleet vehicles, as well as trailers, and limited up to a certain class size. So what we're thinking of here is you're a small-scale bakery and you have a delivery van, or you're a small restaurant and maybe you park your food truck when you're not using it. So small vehicles, but written in a way that you can't park a dozen U-Haul vehicles here. You can't have a commercial rental operation going on. You can't have really large, SDR-sized vehicles here. We're thinking small, artisanal, manufacturer scale vehicles. Standards for new structures and additions. So this is where I reference this image from Big House, Little House, Back House, Barn. The historic farm pattern of connected farm buildings, and having them telescope away from the street. Multiple building masses or detached structures. Simple building massing standards, so no McMansions with gables and bump outs that don't really serve any purpose. We want simple structure, simple massing that matches the character here. And then there's the typical provisions that are similar to the standards today about doors face the street, have a regular pattern of windows, roof design, pitched is preferred. We provide some guidelines on the size of the roof pitch and the eaves. A flat roof is also allowed with a cornice. General site and parking lot, not much change over the existing here. Parking ideally goes to the side and rear of buildings. We are adding a standard for required private open area that's similar to form-based code, so that residential or commercial tenants have access to a little private backyard or side yard space that's green and open to the sky. Standards for materials, design, and modification. So this is a big component of this proposal. Rather than having wishy-washy and vague guidelines in Appendix H, we're going to a much more nuanced standard here. This is where, again, I refer to that flexibility for minimally visible facades and flexibility for non-contributing structures in the historic district. And these standards are rooted in 2 types of treatment of historic property: rehabilitation and restoration. So the National Park Service defines rehabilitation as making possible a compatible use through repair, alterations, and additions. It acknowledges the need to alter or add to a historic building to meet the continuing or new uses while retaining character. So sometimes a door might have to move, sometimes an addition might need to change to evolve to the changing times. The secondary focus of this village district is restoration. so accurately depicting forms or features as they appeared at a particular period of time. So for example, take the Town Hall Annex. If you were to take off that garage and restore the windows from when that was a church back in the 1800s. Or you do have vinyl siding on your property, and it's a wider clapboard than what your home would have originally had, and you're going to go back to a narrow clapboard siding. That's an example of restoration within our village. We're establishing a priority order to guide applicants and guide the committees in the review of applications. So the priority first is to repair or in-kind replacement. Then think about restoration. Then maybe you have to consider replacing with a different material or style. Then maybe you're modifying the window or door pattern. And the very last resort would be removing or obscuring character-defining features. So for example, if you have a window that's got really unique character and panes of glass, can you repair it? Can you fix it? If not, would you be able to replace it with something that's very similar? And the last thing we would want you to do is, and might not allow you to do, would be to seal off the window and close it up into a wall. And here's again where I note that the requirement slate roofs must be replaced with slate. And also that we allow replacement windows to be real or simulated divided light. So the precedent over the years has been from requiring true divided light wood windows even in new buildings to allowing for modern replacements that are fiberglass or aluminum clad, and in some instances vinyl insert windows. The technology has changed a lot over the past few years, and the critical component is that the muntin, the thing that divides the glass, is on the exterior side to have that three-dimensional appearance. So for example, the orthodontist office across the street replaced those windows, and they look very, very similar to the original, including the mounting brackets for the shutters. That helps properties achieve energy efficiency goals as well.
I always wondered how they spelled muntins.
Exterior colors, we are not regulating color. That came through quite clear from the public, that we don't want to require everything to be white, but we do offer guidance. So how to use a primary, secondary color, for example, a pop of color on your front door, but we're not saying any color is or is not allowed. We are adopting a prohibited materials list that mirrors the form-based code list. A lot of those materials are commonly used by big box retail, so again, another provision that discourages a Dollar General or Red Lobster from wanting to be in the village. I do want to note that vinyl siding is not prohibited. There are good and there are bad examples of vinyl siding. And I want to circle back to 42.10. So when you're making a change to a contributing structure, your material is being evaluated on a criteria case-by-case basis. So what is its look, texture, dimensionality, detailing, durability? A really good composite siding can look as good as a wood siding and not require replacement. The wood materials of today are just not the same quality of the wood 100 or 200 years ago, where people are having to keep repairing things and replacing things due to rot. So there are new materials coming on the market, and rather than adopting an allowed and prohibited materials list where allowed things can be changing every year, we wanted to go on that case-by-case basis where we're reviewing that material for its context on the property and how it's being used and can adapt over the years to market conditions. Screening and landscape buffering, really similar to how things are done today with a little bit more nuance. And fences make good neighbors. So if you're putting in a parking lot, you got to put a fence along it to protect the abutting properties from headlight glare, maintaining the privacy of their backyards. That fence requirement also applies to outdoor storage and dining and work areas. So if the house next door to you is going to become an office or a restaurant the next day and have a big parking lot, you're going to have some screening and privacy to protect your residential property. Requiring landscaping to soften the view of parking lots from roads, and then some thresholds for solid waste screening as well. Mechanical equipment and utilities. The gist here is that new mechanical utilities and equipment is located to the side and rear, particularly meters. And if you're doing a big project to a property like adding units or making it a commercial use, something where you're changing the nature or extent of the use, you might be required to relocate that to the side facade. So there are some properties where the electrical meters are right smack in the middle of the historic front, and that's not very visually aesthetic. And we want to work with property owners. Can they move it to the side? And there are some provisions here for cost and feasibility. You know, sometimes where gas companies and where electric companies say things need to go can't be moved just based on site constraints. So we do have a little bit of flexibility there. And lastly, to Mike's question about solar and on-site energy. So the town cannot regulate grid-connected solar. So ground-mounted solar or other on-site energy generation systems, ground-mounted is allowed. And things that are mounted to a non-contributing structure are also allowed. The only thing that we are providing review on is the mounting system. So if you have a historic property with a slate roof and you're going to put solar on it, you might be able to do that, but we want to make sure that that mounting system is not gonna, you're not tearing off the slate roof to put it on, or maybe there's a cupola on your roof and you're going to remove that to accommodate the solar. That might not be okay. How this would play out in the future if we have solar shingles or solar siding, I think it would be a fun discussion for the boards to have. I think the standard is written in a way that it can accommodate that conversation, but it doesn't say one way or another because we cannot regulate solar systems. We can only regulate how things are mounted to a structure.
State laws? State?
That was the guidance that I got from the State Historic Preservation Office when drafting this. And with that, I conclude. Thank you.
The hour is late, but are there any questions?
That's pretty thorough.
Yeah.
Yeah, great job.
And, you know, this represents an immense amount of work and input from your staff, but also the community. I know that people were very invested in this, so.
So if that's the case, then there is a proposed motion for a public hearing.
Move to warn a public hearing to receive comment on proposed amendments to the Williston Unified Development Bylaw covering the village zoning district and associated chapters.
Is there a second?
Second.
Discussion on the motion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. The ayes have it.
I assume that these two public hearings will take place
Yeah.
on the same night?
Most likely.
Okay.
So,
Probably in April.
And we'll probably do like a pre-hearing info session, like we've done in the past.
Yeah, for
with
the public.
Yeah.
That's a good idea.
so, okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you both.
Bring us up to managers.
All right. Not much to share. I'll be quick. So update, Town Hall parking lot project, we're set to go. We had to just get an approved amendment to our grant to make sure the refined scope would still be funded in full. So it will be for $200,000. So we'll get that out to bid hopefully later this month, and we can be on track to do the project later this year. Would be our goal. Working on our TIF district feasibility study is starting to ramp up a bit, working with our Crystal and White and Burke. We'd hope to have that to the board later this spring as well. And then I'll just preview for your next meeting, a couple big items on the agenda. We'll have a major update for the library project along with our funding estimate. The trustees are going to see that next week. The committee wrapped up their work on the schematic design last week. And then there'll be a first introduction into the new town plan that Matt will be here to provide an overview for you as well. So that will end up your official board business year before town meeting with those topics.
Great.
That should be most of your next meeting. Nothing else I have a manager's report, just a couple quick things for other business.
Okay, let's get to that then, other business.
We got this new thing Bruce gave me today, for our overweight postings every year. Looks like it was, let's read it. In accordance with Title 19, Transportation Board has made a promulgated rule to prevent the abuse of highways from November 15th to December 31, January 1 to May 15th, inclusive in each year, or until adoption or announcement of any modification to the rule. 2 copies to include. So now in accordance with that, the rule is administered by the Agency of Transportation. So this rule has not become effective in a particular town until it has been filed with the Select Board and posted in public places. So essentially what we've always done, but it's codified more with the Agency of Transportation. So I think to be in compliance, I need to make sure this has been filed with the Select Board. So maybe a simple motion to confirm receipt and direct the manager to file it would be appropriate.
Okay.
As I was trying to figure out what to ask you to do today.
And I'm sorry, what roads are, yeah, every road is different in the town, correct? Whether it's a state road or a town road?
Yeah, I believe we have jurisdiction over the town roads. Actually, here's the listing. 2-axle trucks on, it's class 2, 3, and 4 highways, the non-state highways. 2-axle trucks, 15,000 pound limit, 3-axle, 18,000, and tractor trailer units, 20,000. And the Public Works Director has discretion over for the roads based on, we let the trucks on them whether they're still frozen or not. So Bruce oversees that based on the conditions.
And this is the same as he's always done? It's just-
Yeah, I think that the one change here is the Select Board just needs to file this rule as they've done some just rule. It seems to be administrative changes within the Agency of Transportation, so.
So you
We want to post the roads, so we just need your acceptance of this.
I will move to confirm receipt of that document and direct the town manager to file it.
Is there a second?
Second?
Discussion on the motion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
There are no nays, the ayes have it.
We've done it. So, then, actually I got the wrong one, but that's okay. 2 outdoor consumption permits for approval as a local liquor control board. First for a Casa Grande over on Marshall Avenue, and then for the new farmhouse restaurant that they alluded to last week. They applied for that. Staff reviewed wastewater allocation and permitted seating. No objection to those 2 outdoor consumption permits. You could consider them in one motion or 2 separate.
Okay. Is there a motion?
Farmhouse Restaurant is the one that was a railroad in Maine, correct?
Yep.
I'm just trying to envision where Casa Grande's outdoor.
The one in the corner.
The rear.
I know where it is, but where is the outdoor area that they would have?
It's the rear entrance if you're
Yeah.
parking in the back parking lot.
And there's like an area there?
Yeah,
There's
there's kind of a
stockade fence
patio.
around it, yeah.
Oh, that's right.
I have no objection to it, I just.
Yeah, no, I was doing the same
Where?
thing. Where is it
It's not a
exactly?
parking lot, I don't know.
So, is there a motion?
Move approval of both.
Is there a second?
Second?
Discussion on the motion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
There are no nays, the ayes have it.
30 by 30 area with 6 tables with 4 chairs each.
The place is packed most nights, a lot of
I
nights.
was just there last night for the first time.
That's all I have.
Okay. Any final thoughts on items from this meeting?
I do, but it won't be long, but I just, I've been getting concerned about the density increases, sort of unintended consequences of some of the density increases, especially in our neighborhoods where people, in residential areas. And I think we will, or should, begin to pay attention to what it means if you live in Lamplight and someone tears down the house next to you and puts a 4-unit home next to you because they can. And I think there's some things that could be problematic to a healthy, thriving neighborhood, given this well-intentioned law. We also have, just a few things like short-term rentals. We don't have a short-term rental ordinance, and that could be something that might become problematic. We were going to circle back on remember we did the whole events thing? You have 12 events a year. We talked about coming back to say, maybe in some neighborhoods, 12 fairs a year in your front yard is not really appropriate. We should rethink that. Some business, small business, make sure we don't have too many loopholes on that. So I just think it's sort of a, let's make sure that our neighborhoods remain neighborhoods. People want to live there without getting exclusionary. So it's a tricky thing, but I think it's something we need to concern ourselves with, given the Home Act density issues. So it's just a thought I wanted to share.
Great.
The Planning Commission's transmitted to me a draft short-term rental ordinance that I'll get on your agenda here, probably after town meeting sometime.
Great.
Any other final thoughts? If not, then we are adjourned.